Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by Ideate Software. Be sure to check out all of their great Revit applications designed to increase your productivity. So, we're at BIM Thoughts again. It's early in the morning here in Las Vegas, but we have great guests with us today, our good friends from Ideate Software. We like the Ideate software because it's great stuff, and we like them because they support BIM Thoughts. Without the support from Ideate, BIM Thoughts would be a little bit more challenging for us to do. So thank you, Ideate.
Revit would be harder to do without Ideate.
You know, Revit would be harder to do. I was thinking of a great intro for BIM Thoughts this morning before BIM Thoughts started about Ideate software, and I thought to myself, for all of our listeners who want all the cool tools that we talk about that you can make with Dynamo, but don't have the time, don't have the knowledge, don't have the person to do that, Ideate Software has made all the cool ones already.
I mean, there's got to be something within the Ideate suite you absolutely love.
There's
so much in there.
It's great. And it's in many different languages now, too.
6 different languages. In May of calendar year 2021, when we updated to Revit 2022, we now have English plus the 5 additional languages.
This is wonderful. And you may think, well, yeah, big deal. What's a big deal? It is a big deal. It's a lot of work to do that. And it's a lot of work to do it right.
Well, and that's a good introduction to the different languages because we have 2 people today that are speaking a different language. I hear that American and English are a bit different, I hear.
Oh, you're not speaking about Python and C# and
No.
Not those kinds of languages.
I'm making a language joke.
Oh.
A pitiful attempt at a language joke.
Okay. Maybe I didn't understand the translation.
Exactly.
So we have what? Nick Johns and Steve Deadman.
Hello.
Hello. I think Nick needs to define himself.
Yes, I wish I had $1 for every time somebody asked me that. So, so my name's Nick Johns. I'm the territory lead for Ideate Software in the UK and EMEA. And I'm based out of Bristol in the west of England, west of the UK.
Steve, your turn. Define yourself.
Well, I'm not dead, despite my second name. Very much alive. So I'm the new customer success manager for the UK and EMEA for Ideate Software, joined just last month. I'm based in Guildford, which is a commuter town about 35 minutes southwest of London.
So a commuter town is translated for suburbs, probably.
Yeah, suburbs. Yeah.
See, I'm getting it.
Yeah, there we are.
So what's new in the world of Ideate?
Well, what's new? As Richard alluded to, lots going on at the moment in terms of new updates and new products and new languages. And like Steve, I've been with the company since February, so I've seen a heck of a lot of changes going on. I think what was really sort of interesting for both Steve and I was to, over the last couple of weeks, to go to the London Build show and also the Digital Construction Week, which Carl was attending and presenting at, just to listen to some insights and see what was going on with the industry, and just making sure that Ideate Software remains current to future needs. So that's what's been going on the last few weeks.
Wow. So what insights did you gather?
I think for me, what's going on in the UK at the moment is a lot of talk, obviously, about BIM. But the one big change that we're seeing at the moment is what they call the new BS 8644 regulation that will be coming in. And this is on the back of I don't know if you heard much about this in the US, but back in 2017, there was a dreadful tragedy at Grenfell Tower block in West London, where 72 people lost their lives, and the cause was focused on cladding of the outside of the apartments. We call them flats. You call them apartments. It was completely flammable. And suddenly, the government realised there was no really any proper sort of legislation for managing the fire risk within buildings. So that's going to be an enormous change going forward with BIM. What's your thoughts, Steve?
Yeah, and link to the new that BS is something that an initiative that's being rolled out called it's called the Golden Thread. So this is kind of traceable information, storable information about the whole building. So this is structured digital information that's stored, managed, maintained by the building owner to maintain this kind of record of everything that emails, drawings, everything that went into the construction of that building, so that they have a kind of auditable trail, so that hopefully a sort of tragedy like the Grenfell Tower won't ever happen again, because there'll be records of everything that was, every decision that was made, every drawing that was produced, every piece of approval of every single piece of equipment and information would all be held and be traceable throughout the whole life cycle of the building.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I think Dana would know this. But in the US, the architect is tasked with that, of keeping all of those records. Is that?
I feel like the architect is tasked with a lot of things related to building code. But Smith Group actually has fire protection engineers, and you can always get fire protection consultants. Of course, in the U.S., we automatically think liability. Those types of things have existed in the U.S. for a while, right?
Yeah,
Right,
we always need a finger to point at somebody in the U.S.
I think it's interesting that the UK is now putting it on. Well, not putting it on, but asking the building owners to keep all of those records, which makes sense to me. That the building owner should be the one who keeps all of those records. The owner
and operator, right?
Right, because it's their building.
Well, they're actually
agreed.
Agreed. But also, what was quite eminent is that it was the message was coming out that everybody is responsible right the way through from cradle to grave. Everybody is responsible for keeping records and keeping data, because that was the problem before, was that people would say, well, it's your responsibility, or it's your responsibility. And now this golden thread that Steve's talking about is exactly what it's saying. It's the golden thread of information. Everybody needs to keep records. Everybody needs to keep data. It needs to have traceability factors. It needs to be trackable. So, and this is something, the tragedy was one of the worst tragedies of modern times in the UK. So this is something, I think with the regulations, Steve, go live in April. Is that correct, Steve? Next year?
Yeah, around that time,
isn't it?
I mean, at the moment it hasn't been
right.
fully legislated
Correct.
yet. It's still kind of going through the government machine, but I think they're looking at April next year.
Wow.
For when this new standard comes out.
It's too bad that a tragedy has to cause this.
I totally agree, Bill. You hear a number of things. I mean, what was really interesting at the Digital Construction Week, which I was at, I heard a lot of people presenting saying, do you know what? We've learned a lot about technology in the last 10 months. Since the pandemic, we've all got used to Zoom. We've all got used to Teams.
Right.
And I'm thinking, well, hold on a second. That technology was there. Why did it take a pandemic before people adopted that technology? So the analogy, you're absolutely right what you're saying. I totally agree.
Yeah, there have been a number of tragedies across the United States and the world. And unfortunately, if there's any good that can come from it, is the fact that these regulations have changed and been updated. I think that's, and you see that with Grenfell too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree, Richard. And what was coming out of the Digital Construction Week, first is going to be the fire safety, and then the focus is going to shift then to HVAC, so heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and then electrical. So that's
Right.
being mooted as the next big focuses after the fire sort of regulations is all in play.
Right. So let's switch gears a little bit from this to talk about software and what's new in IDA land.
I don't know that my Revit experience is very distant from my Ideate experience. I've been using them for about the same time. Like Revit and Ideate go hand in hand in my past, if you will. I've always loved Ideate tools. And definitely, I'm sure Richard will let you know that you can try them out if you want. They probably have really great trials. I've always had a license, so I've never had to worry about that. I feel like everywhere I go, if they don't have Ideate, I'm like, why don't you have Ideate? You need Ideate. So I've become really good friends with the Ideate folks over the years. But over the years, they've added so many great things to make it so easy to sell. Right? Not only do you have the classics, BIM Link, Sticky, and Explorer, now they have all these really cool Ideate apps. They got different languages. I feel like they're always keeping us active. You know, like they say, they're going to conferences, make sure they're addressing the needs of the industry. And as we've mentioned on this show before, you know, Carl can definitely speak to the interface is just so sleek, right? Well, I'm not going to create a Dynamo tool, you know, that my users are probably going to struggle with if Ideate can do it perfectly and intuitively. So I just love Ideate tools. Can you guys speak to anything maybe that you guys are in the works? Any advancements on tools that you currently have, or maybe new tools that you might be adding to the apps, Ribbon?
Richard, why don't we bring you in? Yeah.
Yeah, as I say, as a matter of fact, we just released about maybe about a month ago or less than a month ago in November, a new version of our ID8 apps that you just mentioned, Dana. So our ID8 apps is a collection of 9 productivity tools for all Revit users. It doesn't matter what discipline, if you're doing mechanical, electrical, plumbing, architecture, or structure. For instance, there are going to be productivity tools for everyone, such as renumbering things, being able to find the visibility of elements, being able to lay out sheets and views very easily. And so in the realm of the sheets and views tools, we've added a new feature to our ID8 View Creator, which allows you to create new views by different methods. And there's a series of methods basically allowing you to create new views by let's say applying dependents or by copying a template, for instance. And you're kind of setting up all the view parameters beforehand, and then you're creating a whole series of views, as opposed to sort of the way that I think traditionally it's been done is you might copy views and then go back, change the phase, change the other view properties about it, change the, let's say the view template assignments and so forth. But this is all done now sort of up front beforehand, and then you create the views, and so they're all ready for you to go. So one of our new methods that we've introduced is called Room Method, which allows you to create new interior elevation views, again, based on the room. But then you can also lay out basically on the same sheet all of the interior elevations of the room, but the 3D view, maybe the call out, reflected ceiling plan. So it's very customizable in how you can actually create that.
I love this. Once again, I get asked a lot of things about how we can utilize computation for these types of tasks. So if I don't have to do it in Dynamo, I love it. And we do what we refer to as room data sheets.
Exactly.
So this perfectly aligns with that.
Yeah.
Love it. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you if you had a chance, because it has been released, like I said, about maybe 3 weeks ago. It was about the first or second week of November when we released the new version of IdeateApps. And we've really just started to sort of promote it on our marketing side and some of our other like blog articles and so forth. And I'm actually both myself and Steve are going to be creating some videos with this new method for creating views. And as with many of our other applications, like I mentioned, that we kind of allow you to build rules. And those rules then are very customizable. So there are rules where you can use this new method for creating views. And I think it's also somewhat similar, like we in our IdeateApps, our Renumber tool, we have a number of new or rules in general, but also new rules that address certain standards. And maybe, Steve, you can mention a little bit about the work you did when you first came on board to make sure that we were addressing some of the UK standards when it comes to our renumbering.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So obviously, I think this was in my first week. I was leapt upon to create a sheet renumbering rule that addressed the ISO 19650 naming convention standard. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but the way we number drawings in the UK is obviously vastly different to the US. The US is just 2 or 3 numbers, is that right? Whereas ours is a code. You have 7 different differentiator fields, all with different codes. So it can get quite involved and get quite tricky. So we've created a rule that helps simplify that process just by allowing you to populate those fields quickly and easily with a rule that ships with the latest version of apps that Richard has mentioned. So that was good to be part of that, and I think we're looking to extend that to other standards as well within that same ISO 19650 standard.
Yeah, and I think that's for more of a generalized comment. We're trying to look at our all of our customers around the world, and I know that Singapore has some different standards, and we've worked with some consultants within Singapore to make sure that our applications are adhering to those standards. I think with Nick and Steve working directly in the UK, understanding how the UK market and their standards are very different. We just had a call this morning with a company in South Africa where they were mentioning their standards were a bit different than the UK, even though they're kind of based on some of the UK standards. So I think it's always great for us as a company to understand all of these different standards in use around the world and try to adhere to them and make sure that our tools are as compatible as possible and flexible, I should say, as possible.
I think, Richard, it's interesting just by listening to Dana's reaction. That's the kind of reaction. Maybe not as energetic because we are English, as you know. But the response we got from the enhanced functionality within apps, and certainly with the work Steve's done on the renumbering with to align with ISO 19650, we've had the same type of reaction that Dana gave. Very, very positive, and we're obviously heading in the right direction with that.
Speaking about standards, having spent last week in UK at DCW and seeing a lot of the presentations there driving around standards, open BIM, open source, IFC, BCF, and I did sit in on a couple of sessions about the golden thread, as you guys had mentioned. One of the things here in North America, US, Canada, we tend to shy away from standards. We may have guidelines, we may have specifications, but being actually mandated to do something tends to be something that we shy away from. Can you guys speak to how having those standards has kind of maybe helped the positives that we've had from that and moving to things like ISO 19650 and the new BS 8644, how those are helping?
Yeah, I can go on that one. With regards to standards, I think it just helps with alignment of when you're working across multidisciplinary teams, that everyone's using the same naming convention. It just helps with the documentation. It just helps with that flow of information. You can read, because you've agreed. Obviously, you'd have your BIM kickoff meeting where you'd agree your standards for naming, and if everyone's using that ISO 9650 standard, that helps straight away, so that you can already know what the drawings are going to be looking like when you get them, what the naming conventions, and you'll agreed certain container fields of what's going to be what and who's doing which drawings. It just helps people know the standard. It's a bit of a mind blowing when you first see this really long number, but once you get used to using it, it makes sense, and everybody knows what they're doing, and it should be one less conversation you have at your start of your BIM meetings about naming conventions, because you can just say, we're using the ISO 9650 standards, here we are, get on with it. And then so it does help with in those sort of respects.
That brings up a good point, because one of the things that we're always very excited about is, how can we use generative design or automation, or, how can we bring the design industry closer to the automotive industry with ways we automate things and get rid of the boring and do the fun. Well, it seems to me that standards is a perfect way to do that. If we know what we're going to name things, if we know what we call it, we don't have to spend time to reprogram our little algorithm to call it a door instead of a sash, or a window instead of a sash, or whatever the case might be. So it seems like, as you mentioned, Steve, at the beginning, it's a big bunch of reading, a bunch of paperwork, a bunch of things to learn. But once you learn it, it really does improve the process and speed things up.
It does, yeah, absolutely, yeah, and that goes right down to naming of individual objects as well, families, or not necessarily families. You could be objects in different software, but as long as you're using the same naming conventions, then it's standard across the whole company. Whether you're using Revit or Bentley or ArchiCAD or whatever platform you're using, you can still use those same naming conventions, and it's standard across the whole project.
And I think even when you kind of go off the rail, so to speak, and you may not be adhering to some standards, I think our applications have helped people kind of right the train, so to speak, and come back on the right track, in the sense of using like Excel to be able to quickly change and update those standards, and then be able to repopulate your model. I think about that a lot with COBie, which is probably not used as much in North America as it may be used in the UK and Europe and some Asian countries like Singapore, I think, where there's a number of standards that must be adhered to with COBie, and some of the COBie shared parameters that are within Revit, that then you can use Excel to make sure that you're adhering to the correct standards, and updating your model to make sure that you can send out the COBie Excel spreadsheet correctly.
Well, I think that brings up another good point, Richard, maybe for Nick and Steve. But what are you seeing in the UK and maybe wider in Europe in general about how firms are embracing the support of third-party solutions like ID8 for their Revit or whatever workflow to improve when they're working with standards? How are they bringing those in place?
I think my experience with this, Carl, is that once you are in a position to actually explain and present and communicate to customers the benefits, and you can actually demonstrate the reduction in time, in costs, in terms of Revit data management workflows by using solutions like Ideate Software. I think it's an eye-opener moment for a lot of people. I think they suddenly realize, wow, didn't realize that you could do this, didn't realize we would get the productivity gains. And that's typically the feedback we get from our customers, whether it's in the UK and Europe. Steve hopefully will testify to this. Steve's been on a number of calls with me from organizations in France, in Germany, in the UK. And, as soon as they're aware of what these, our third-party applications, our Revit data management products can do, it really is an eye-opener. So it's all about messaging, it's all about communication, and it's all about actually, communicating properly that these are kind of the benefits and performance and productivity gains that you can get. So we see a very promising response to tools like Ideate Software, but it needs to be communicated and messaged and positioned in the right way.
Absolutely. And then if it is, you've created an English version of Dana. They all get excited and stand behind what ID8 can do. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and again, I'll reference the call that the three of us, Steve, Nick, and myself, were on this morning to this company in South Africa, where they were talking about how the user interface was so easy. And of course, I want to say almost every company, right, has Dynamo, and they're doing Dynamo scripts, and we think that's fantastic. And if there are, I think, really certain areas where Dynamo shines and is the perfect tool, but there are situations where not just Ideate Software, but many other third-party solutions have created a very elegant solution, and the interface is so easy to use that there's no reason to recreate that in Dynamo and update it and to maintain it. And I think this is what this particular customer was saying, was that our interface is so easy to their average users that they can pick up Ideate Software as an example, and but it would take them so long to figure out how to do something within Dynamo. And I think that's where the difference is that, again, Dynamo's not the silver bullet for every single workflow. And sometimes I hear that a lot, at least in the United States. And I think, the fact that there are these, many other third-party tools, and again, not just Ideate Software, that do such a great job and make it so much easier to use these Revit workflows.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, going back to Dynamo, I don't want to knock Dynamo, and I have used it, but I have a love-hate relationship with Dynamo. There's times where it's brilliant. You think, oh, this is so good. I'm just loving it. It's doing exactly what I want. And there's times when it's so frustrating when you load a package and the node's out of date, or you need to update it and you can't find the package because the person who wrote the package hasn't updated it to the latest version of Revit. It became so frustrating. And then I remember a couple of years ago at an event, I had a chat with somebody, and I said, "Oh, are you using much Dynamo?" And he just turned around and said, "No, because we've got ID8 tools. I don't need it I don't need any more than that. That does everything I need." So yeah, as Richard was saying, yeah, there's all these tools out there. It's just finding the right one to suit your application is the most important thing. But we think with our solutions, we can do most everything that Dynamo can do, and it's easier for the end user to use.
Yeah, I agree. I think Richard and Steve's made some good points there. I mean, I'm a great believer that you have this, and I don't know what Dana thinks about this, but you have this sort of digital toolbox, and you use the right tool for the right job. And sometimes Dynamo, if you're working on a specific project or whether you're doing a software prototyping, Dynamo may be the right tool. But what we find is that when our customers are looking for day-to-day, reliable, robust, trustworthy, stable Revit data management solutions that deliver proven results, then we normally find they'll defer to Ideate Software solutions.
I completely agree. And I mean, I am definitely, as we all know, the cheerleader of Dynamo, but it also has its faults. I think there's definitely some things like Orchestra with a K. Pat on the back to Mustafa and the Data Shapes team for creating a tool like that make things easier. But the fact that you have to purchase an application to make Dynamo easier is frustrating in and of itself. So unless you're going to hire someone like me to manage your Dynamo library and your packages and your, everything like that, it just doesn't really make sense when you can get a few Ideate licenses and have this amazing interface. It's incredibly intuitive and, as you mentioned, robust. I mean, if there's someone that comes to me and says, "Dana, will you build a script to handle revisions?" I say, "No, use BIMLink." Right? I mean, there's just certain things that I know that I can look to Ideate to do in a great and intuitive way.
No, I was going to say, I have this story from a couple of years ago where I was at a Boston Revit user group, and there was they were giving Dynamo classes. And so I went there, and we were doing the exercises to kind of like learn some of the basics of Dynamo. And it was about setting up some nodes or a script to export out to Excel, some information, some parameter data, and then basically change some things and then import that back into Revit. So it took a long time to create this script, but go through each node. And so I was kind of quiet. They didn't know who I was in the back of the room there. But at the end, I let the instructor talk, of course, and go through the presentation. But after everyone left, I walked up to this person and I just said, like, "Oh, have you heard of ID8 BIMLink?" And he's like, "Oh my God." He goes, "I use it every single day." He goes, "I would never use Dynamo for that. It's just that this was a good exercise to show, how you might create a script." But it was just so funny that, here was this Dynamo instructor that was using an example, like a workflow example that was, I think, one of the primary sort of workflows that Ideate Software solves. And, he was like, "Oh no, I use ID8 BIMLink every single day." So I always thought that was kind of a funny little story about my first introduction to Dynamo. But I do think that for, let's say geometric considerations when it comes to like looking at curtain wall geometry across a very specific modeling aspect. Those are things where I think Dynamo really shines. That it's a very sort of specific workflow or task that you're trying to solve. I think that's really good.
I think a good way to wrap this up, we've talked about a little bit of everything today, which is great. I always love how we sort of ping pong around the topics here. But since we have Nick and Steve, I think it might be fitting to sort of end on the question of how do you think that the UK building environment differs from us in the US? And we've got Richard on for a little US backup here compared to the rest of the world.
Oh, I mean, it's in terms of, I think from my perspective, obviously worked in BIM for 10, 15 years or so, I think I started my sort of BIM career at HDR, Henning Durham Richardson, big multidisciplinary firm based in the US. I think if you go back 10 years, there was the talk of BIM. As I first learnt Revit at HDR, first became exposed to ID8 tools when I worked for HDR. There was the feeling that the US was ahead of us. They were doing stuff in terms of BIM, and it was integrated project delivery. That was the sort of term I remember. And you were kind of more ahead of the game with the way things are being done in terms of collaboration and the way the tools are being used. I think it's probably fair to say that we're probably ahead of the US in some respects, in terms of certainly in the way we've implemented standards. And some of the we've developed these BIM levels, the stages of how we deliver these projects in using BIM around certain standards with Kobe exports, and now obviously the other buzzword that was heard a lot during the Digital Construction Week in London Build is this thing called a digital twin. I don't know if you've heard about that. So this is kind of your digital version of your physical building. And obviously the aim behind the digital twin is to extract information from a digital model with regards to building lifecycle costs, energy use, all that sort of thing. So along with digital twins and asset management, I think we are kind of surging ahead a little bit compared to the US. Do you think that's a fair observation?
I think it's incredibly fair. And I think, especially in terms of BIM in and of itself, I think you guys have been very far along. And I think a big part of that, it comes back to the mandates. And
yeah, agreed.
If I think we are in the States in particular, I'm not sure about Canada, I can't speak to Canada, but in the States, I think we're moving towards that. And hopefully with the infrastructure bill, we will see some mandates in terms of, BIM and the information that has to be tied to that model, whether that's, specifically for the owner and operator, or, something larger as a whole, I think would even be cooler to tie it back to this infrastructure idea. But I think, we are on that way. I think in the sense of building codes, however, I don't know. I think in the sense that I think once again, it ties back to liability in the States, and the way that we are so happy. We always need someone to point a finger at. I think that we're really far ahead in that, and then almost to a fault, because we have so many building codes and so many various building codes, which makes a lot of sense because the building codes in Nevada where Bill is are going to obviously be very different from Virginia, where I am, which, of course, makes a lot of sense in terms of the environment and the materials used and such. So trying to integrate those into a whole bunch of different applications, especially for a firm as large as Smith Group, where we have work across many states, becomes incredibly challenging. And so utilizing something like Ideate that makes that simplified, it definitely helps, whether that's by bringing in different tables through Excel, or utilizing formulas through Excel, what have you. I think that is definitely an opportunity that if people aren't taking, they're missing. I wish that it were easier, and I wish that we could have an easy add-in solution that could take all of those calculations away from us. But once again, tying back to the liability, I think that we, as architects and engineers, need to own those calculations and ensure that our designs comply, not only for the environment, for the safety of people.
Well, I think Dana, you made some really good points about the infrastructure bill. I do have a lot of hope for that in the United States, that will push, I think, maybe some of these standards or just integration a little bit better. And I think about to the UK, with the Elizabeth line that was, going to be, I think, opening up next year. Is that correct, Steve and Nick?
Oh, God, it should have opened about 3 years ago. Yeah, there's another delayed infrastructure project in the UK. I think it's next year now. Yeah.
How complicated that was when you think about building a tunnel, right? A brand new tunnel through one of the most, major dense cities in the world. How amazing, just the construction, but just the coordination that needed to happen. I mean, with so many different organizations. And then now you've got HS2 that's coming online. And I think there's maybe been some more, I guess my point is there's been some more complicated infrastructure projects in the UK that maybe have pushed some of these things more so than the United States or North America. But now hopefully we're seeing some of that. So we can learn a lot from what's happened in the UK and Europe, I think.
I think it's difficult to kind of compare the two, because obviously the US is so vast with different states, different legislation in each state. Must be really make things really difficult. Obviously here we're a small country with just, we don't have those same kind of problems or issues that you have over there. So I think it's difficult to compare the two directly in that respect.
I think that's a good comparison here in Canada. The same thing, vast land. How we build things in Vancouver versus how we build things in, Thompson Bay, Winnipeg, way up north. Big difference. But I think that's a valid point, and I think the idea of at least that they adopted, or that we now have the ISO 19650, so it's an international standard. We may even get some people that adopt that, whether the rest of the country or the rest of the state, or the rest of the province adopts it, someone does. So the more people that get on board and see the value of that, I think it's going to move forward. And I love the way that Dana brought her response back to tie it back into Ideate. I couldn't agree more. And as a final thought, Bill has been feverishly typing in the chat box that says his mic decided to give up the ghost halfway through the recording. A couple of his last words were that he certainly agreed with Steve about how, with the mandates and the way that they're pushing BIM level 2 and onto level 3, that the UK has sort of squeaked ahead of the US on how we're handling BIM. And as far as his favorite ID8 feature, he said he's a big fan of the network licensing, which I think is a sweet tool or sweet feature as well. And with that, I would like to bring the plane in for a landing. Thank everyone for being with us today and for listening to another great episode of BIM Thoughts. And we will be back again, same bat time, same bat place next week. Until then, everyone, have a good day.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you, Ideate.
Thank you for having us.